Hello, everyone. Welcome to the next episode of Beyond Blockchain. I'm your host, Sean Chambers, aka Mr. T. Web 3. I'm here with the legendary Harley Emerson, my co-host. How are you doing today, Harley?
I'm doing awesome. So glad to have ID here. I'll go ahead and let him introduce himself. I don't think this man needs any introduction, but tell us a little bit about yourself, ID.
Okay, thank you, Sean and Harley. Awesome job you're doing with the Beyond Blockchain podcast. My name is Ido, okay, but everyone calls me ID. Um, I like to introduce myself as a three-time founder who has evolved into a startup coach and a startup investor. So my full-time job is that I provide certain support services to people who are building startups. And I am also building a nascent young infant VC company that will start to pump capital into some of those startups. In a nutshell, that's me. And maybe I might add that in the last 4 years, I have had the privilege to mentor, advise, perhaps coach in some cases, upwards of 1,500 founders in 21 countries on 4 continents. But in a nutshell, that's me. Thank you very much.
Wow, that sounds epic, man. You're really going global with it. So loving what you're doing. Yeah, so kind of get us started. Can you define Web3 and its relevance? And what is Web3 to you? And how does it differ from the previous Web 2.0?
Okay, so I think that Web3 ultimately, right, is the natural, is a philosophy that could not have been expressing itself, right? So Web3 is the manifestation of a number of aspirational principles for how humans want to share information with each other, especially using our information and communication technologies, for sharing of such information. To give some historical context, we as a society, we as humanity built a communications technology, a communications infrastructure, okay, that was devoid of transparency, that had a lot of power and authority centralized in a tiny fraction of the general space, right? Within which that technology was deployed. Human that lacked features like trust, as I said before, transparency, community participation, and so on and so forth. So Web3 can you hear me? I seem to have lost my connection. Can you hear me?
Yes. Having some bad weather in Africa right now. So
can you hear me?
You're good to go now.
Can you hear me?
Yep. All right, I'll edit this part out. So no big deal.
Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm getting you in bits and pieces. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
Okay. It appears like I dropped off for a little bit.
There was a little period where you did drop off, but it seems like you're in now.
Okay.
And we can always edit this part out, or we can
Yeah,
take.
we'll edit this part out.
Okay.
Let me know when you're ready for the next question, and yeah, we could continue on to that.
Okay. If you'd like me to take it again, please let me know.
Yeah, I think they would probably be easier for editing to go ahead and take it all from the top, anyways.
Okay.
So let me know whenever you're ready. It seems like we got better connection now, and you can go ahead and start from the Sean and ask that question again about Web3.
Okay. Yeah, so getting to Web3 and its relevance, what is Web3 to you, and how does it differ from previous iterations of the other web?
Okay. All right. So Web3, you could say that Web3 is the natural expression of the natural next step in the evolution of previous versions. The web representing how we as human beings have structured or implemented our information communications, infrastructure, as it were, over the decades. And so, because those previous iterations, Web 2, Web 1, and others, lacked certain critical desirable features, namely, they lacked transparency, they lacked trust, inbuilt inherent trust, and they were also structured in such a way that they were centralized, which means that a lot of authority and power was concentrated in a tiny fraction of the total number of nodes in that network, right? And so you could argue that it was only a matter of time before people would express enough interest in accelerating the evolution to the next iteration, which is where we are now, Web3, where we are working towards and advocating for a newer version of the web, of the web, that is, 1, centralized, 2, transparent, and by extension, as derivatives, has inbuilt trust, okay, has inbuilt capacity for community participation, okay, and so on and so forth, and then you can layer, smart contracts, automation, and stuff like that, cryptocurrencies and stuff like that on top of it. But I think that the critical things that set it apart are the centralization, the transparency, and the trust. Those 3 things are the critical things that separate.
I agree 100%. It definitely levels the playing field out and creates more efficiency. And also, like you mentioned, it's more decentralized. There's more opportunities for more people to play a part with this technology. I was wondering, since you are so involved in the startup space, how do you see Web3 impacting startups in the near future?
Okay. I think that, again, because of the decentralization of both power, power/authority, and, resources, quote unquote, resources/opportunities, what this means is that going into the future, the Web3 introduces a more democratized, more widespread, more, quote unquote, equitable distribution of opportunities for building startups. So, because the previous versions of the web, Web 2 and others, were structured in such a way that there were certain central nodes, and the farther away from any of those central nodes you were, the less the quality of your experience of the Web 2. Now, with Web 3, if implemented properly, you would have a totally decentralized network of networks. And so anybody can have access to both the authority and the resources to build what they need to build, be that a technical product or be that a service that they their geographical region and stuff like that. So I think that in the future, we are definitely going to see an explosion of locally relevant startups that should be just as effective as their global counterparts in Web2.
Definitely. Totally agree with you there. And like Harley said, Web3 is leveling the playing field for the people. It's banking the unbanked. And I think that that's going to be very important going on to the future. So can you share your journey? Can you share your journey into the Web3 space and what motivated you to?
I'm struggling to hear. Could you take that again?
Yes. Not a problem. We could edit this out. All right, action. Can you share your journey into Web3 space and what motivated you to dive into this domain? All
Sorry,
right.
did you say something?
Yes. Let's start again. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you now. Yes.
Okay. Can you share your journey into the Web3 space and what motivated you to dive into this domain?
Okay. So I think I stumbled on decentralized DLTs, decentralized ledger technologies, and blockchains in I think that was 2016, thereabout. And it immediately struck a strong chord, if I may qualify in that manner, with me, because as you know, I live in West Africa, I live in Nigeria, and access to opportunities has always been a big thing on my mind, right? So I saw immediately the opportunity that blockchain represents for bringing greater access to opportunities to people that live in this region, okay? People that are deserving, in terms of quality of ideas, in terms of the amount of effort that they are willing to put behind executing and chasing those ideas, but they just have traditionally been excluded, quote unquote, because of the distance from one of the central nodes that, like we spoke about earlier. So that was my initial introduction to blockchains, and it's been a quote unquote love affair ever since. I do volunteer for a few global blockchain organizations, and I try my best to both improve the local awareness of global blockchain trends and also local adoption of blockchain. Now, not necessarily in crypto circles, but in ways where the technical features of blockchain can improve business outcomes, can improve the quality of life for people every day. Talk about health, talk about education, credentialing, talk about immigration verification, talk about all sorts of sectors. In Nigeria and Africa particularly, there are so many absent societal structural systems in African societies, right? Talk about health, education, immigration, identity management, and these are things that, because we are not in the industrial age, because we are just trying to set up those systems, even though we are behind, we have a unique opportunity to implement those systems in such a way that we actually build improved versions of the systems that the Western world has. So quote unquote, I think there's a silver lining in that cloud. But that's been my.
I love that aspect of it. Essentially, it's a borderless technology. It breaks borders. Anyone in any area geographically can go ahead and be a part of this. I can't help but to notice your sign in the background, Bullion Labs. Can you maybe tell us a little bit more about Bullion Labs, what their mission
Oh,
and
sure.
how they're
Oh,
integrated
sure.
into Web3?
Oh, sure. Thank you so much. If you don't mind, can I share my screen very briefly?
Of course, you should have permission. Go ahead and
Right.
it allows you.
So Boolean Labs is actually a collection of labs. Okay. Boolean Labs is sometimes it's sufficient in some contexts to call Boolean Labs an incubator, but it's much more than that. Okay. Boolean Labs is a startup support agency outfit, whatever we want to call that. But I'll explain with the aid of a diagram shortly. Now, we are a collection of labs, like I said. Okay. The first of those labs is something called the Venture Lab. Okay. And the Venture Lab is essentially the vehicle through which we assist founders with ideation support. Now, there's a little bit of a comic angle to this. When people ask me, hey, ID, what do you do? Conferences, meetings, mixers, meetups. I have a funny version and I have a serious version of an answer for that. The funny version says, I help startup founders clear the cobwebs in their heads, okay? But essentially what I'm trying to hint at is many times founders have a lot of unconscious conclusions, biases, assumptions that perhaps because I have interacted with literally thousands of founders, I can spot those things quickly, but many times they are not aware of those things. So the Venture Lab, in a nutshell, is our vehicle for helping founders refine their ideas. So it's idea refinement. The MVP Lab, the one in yellow, is our vehicle for helping founders give birth to a refined idea. So obviously, if you've been through the Venture Lab, the next question on their minds is, oh, idea, I see what you were talking about now. I have a clear idea what I want to build. I have a clear idea what the journey looks like. However, how can I give birth? How can I birth this idea? Do you know anybody that could help me build some kind of prototype or MVP or what the future product might look like? Now, we have a technical talent pool that helps us with building MVPs. Now, in technical parlance, an MVP is a minimum viable product, which is a small, minimalist version, of what a product will look like in the future. And so the MVP Lab is a dev shop that helps us build prototypes and MVPs for founders. The Growth Lab is, the next lab is the Growth Lab, okay? And the Growth Lab is essentially growth support. So what do we do with that? We help founders cycle through a list of experiments, okay, that help them arrive at that repeatable and scalable growth formula that is unique to their startups. A lot of founders fall into the trap of copying business models. So this business model worked for Uber, I'm going to copy it. This business model worked for Airbnb, I'm going to copy it. Sometimes, but then they realize 3 months into strategy that, this is not working. There is a systematic process that we can walk founders through, a series of 8 to 12 weeks of experimentation that takes you from audience validation to message validation to 8 to 12 weeks of experimentation that helps you arrive at your own unique growth formula. And finally, the funding lab, the fourth of those labs, is our fundraising assistance, quote unquote, division. So we help founders with pitching assistance, pitch deck preparation assistance, and also introduction to our carefully curated network of investors. Now, Bullion Capital, like I mentioned earlier, is an offshoot of Bullion Labs and is joining that carefully curated network of investors to whom we introduce founders on a periodic basis. Now, that's that in a nutshell. Is that clear?
Oh, that's beautiful. I think that definitely gives a nice visual aspect for a lot of people looking to enter the blockchain realm, Web 2, Web 3, and even looking to create their own startups, man. I think that that's really great. Can you kind of discuss what are a few legal and regulatory considerations for entrepreneurs, what they should be aware of launching a startup on Web3?
Thank you so much. So, definitely, blockchain, because blockchain, or rather, because crypto has left a bad taste in the mouths of quite a number of people, right? More than a few people in the last few years, due to its highly speculative nature. The first thing I'd like to mention is the need for founders who are building Web3 startups to pay a lot of attention to compliance with financial regulations. Now, nobody can talk about compliance with financial regulations without talking about the local context, because compliance with financial regulations in the US is a world apart from compliance with financial regulations in Africa, Nigeria, or elsewhere, right? In Europe, Asia, even South America, right? So that's the first thing I'm definitely going to mention, okay? Compliance with financial regulations in such a way that takes into account the local context and what are the specific prohibitions and or advisories that are available from the local regulators. I'll give you a case in point. I don't want to spend too much time with this, but I'll give you a case in point. In Nigeria, the banking regulator has actually, since 2019 that I'm aware of, probably before then, but since I became aware of the prohibition in 2019, the banking regulator, called the Central Bank of Nigeria, has prohibited all commercial banks from engaging in any type of blockchain activity, right? So the banks cannot, but maybe perhaps their spin-offs and the companies that the businesses they support can, and even those ones have a strong advisory. So that may not be the exact same climate of regulation that exists in North America or in Europe or in Asia or in Australia, but it is important to have some local context and pay attention to that. Can I go ahead and maybe mention one or two more?
Yes.
Of course.
Okay, awesome. So the other one I'd like to mention is consumer protection laws. So again, because the highly speculative nature of crypto has created an image, and a lot of people cannot distinguish between crypto and blockchain, right? So many times when we're talking about blockchain or Web3, the interpretation in the minds of quite a number of lay people is that you are talking about crypto. So because of this, consumer protection laws are a big area that I think that future Web3 founders should pay attention, because you may just have people, raising up litigations and stuff. There's smart contract audits and security compliance, so you want to make sure that your smart contracts are not leaking data, in your Web3 product. There's intellectual property protection, and then there's data protection and privacy laws. These are the things that I'd like to mention under that topic: regulatory and legal considerations. Thank you.
You definitely hit on some great points. Right now, it really is kind of the Wild West when it comes to crypto regulations, and it makes it even more complicated, like you mentioned, with it being this global technology, because there are local regulations that differ from location to location. And just like you mentioned, the smart contract auditing is important, because a lot of people don't know how to read these smart contracts. So if you're unable to read it, you really don't know what you're signing. And I think that really just comes down to education, because like you mentioned, a lot of people, they hear blockchain technology or DLT, and they automatically think crypto. And a lot of people have a bad taste in their mouth after, because there has been a lot of stuff in the industry that hasn't fully played out just because of the regulations. But how should startups choose the right blockchain platform, and what are some of the technical infrastructures required to building on this technology?
Okay, great question. Great question. Two parts to that. One is the quote unquote checklist for selecting a blockchain platform, and two is technical considerations, technical infrastructure considerations. So I'm under the first part of that question. The first thing I would say is forget about blockchain, forget about Web3, even though we are talking about blockchain and Web3. And the first thing to think about is, what is the problem that I want to solve for a customer? When I'm wearing the hat of a startup coach, this is the way I frame that question. I always like to ask founders this question. Can you describe to me what is that painful, severe, frustrating, agonizing, annoying problem that you have found, hopefully found, in an overlooked segment of human population, for which, if you are not able to deliver a solution to them, they are assigned to this level of frustration, right? So the first point there is to define the problem that this Web3 or this blockchain platform, this blockchain product, or this blockchain startup is going to solve. Okay, that is the single most important thing for people who are trying to launch new blockchain startups to consider. What's the problem to solve? After defining that, then we can talk about other considerations. Number one, among the candidate or available blockchain platforms under consideration, what are their ratings in terms of technical features? Technical feature number one would be scalability, right? Depending on whether you are building a permissioned or a permissionless blockchain, most likely you are going to have, because of its decentralized nature, most likely you're going to have a high adoption of users. Therefore, scalability and performance are a big deal, right? You want to make sure that you pick something that rates highly on that dimension. The third dimension will be the consensus mechanism. So in blockchain, I don't want to get too technical, for the audience, but there are quite a number of consensus mechanisms. There's proof of authority, proof of work, proof of stake, quite a number of approaches to selecting the consensus mechanism to adopt or to implement, right? Different consensus mechanisms work better for different use cases, and so the choice will depend on context. In a nutshell, those are the top three on my mind, but we could add some others like security and privacy, community support, how many developers or how many technical talents are available for that platform, but those are like secondary factors. The three top primary factors are problem definition, security and performance, and consensus mechanism.
Definitely. What I'm seeing in the industry is that different blockchains are specializing in different mechanisms and industries. So it definitely, I think, choosing the right blockchain, it's really going to be depending on what industry you need and your use cases and seeing what you need. Totally agree with you on that. Now, another aspect for startups is, can you kind of elaborate on the importance of community building and networking effects in Web3 startups?
Okay. So the philosophy of blockchain itself, right? The philosophy of Web3 itself is community, because finally we are saying the previous infrastructure that our civilization's communications has relied upon was built upon central nodes that served everybody. This time around, we want to distribute that quote unquote computing and resources and decision making, across as wide a population as possible. So it's a more inclusive philosophy. Therefore, community building, if I may say so, is kind of inbuilt into the DNA of blockchain and Web3. And so it's important to have systems that promote user engagement, user enlightenment and education and orientation, things that assure people of trust in the system, things that reassure people of trust in the system. Now, the interpretation of the centralized network that we as a society depended upon for so long, in previous iterations, Web2 and co, was that there was very little trust in the system. People don't trust banks. People don't trust, centralized, systems. Now, if we're taking them to Web3, then we should be promoting and advocating, well, not necessarily advocating, but reassuring people because of the inbuilt facilities for greater trust that are built into Web3. Obviously, feedback loops are also important. It's important to create forums, communities, if possible, offline and online, things that allow people to interact with one another and and take feedback from the community for building their products in an iterative manner. Thank you very much.
Harley,
Yeah, I was on mute. I agree completely. When it comes down to this technology, you're right. It comes down to trust. And with this technology, it's more transparent so we can see what's going on. And that really helps build trust and build these communities. I was kind of curious. Can you share some success stories of startups you've seen, either in Web3 or Web2, that have been able to utilize and be successful? And what does it take for these startups to be successful?
Okay. One comes to mind. The founder is a close friend of mine. He also operates out of Nigeria. A few weeks ago, about 3 weeks ago, he was in San Francisco for TechCrunch Disrupt, and he was one of the featured startups. The startup name is called Akowe, AKOWE.e, Akowe, and then the website is akowe.app. Essentially, they are building, well, before going to TechCrunch, they were building they framed the problem that they were solving as an educational credential, educational institutions to offer more trustable, quote unquote, credentials. Can you hear me? Okay,
yeah.
Awesome. All right. But when they got to TechCrunch and they interacted with a few of the investors, and other ecosystem players there, their eyes were open to the global possibilities. So beyond Nigeria, beyond Africa, this could actually be a potential platform to provide credentialing across not just education, but customs and immigration, pretty much anything that requires some kind of statement of proof, so at this point in time, their stock price has really, really gone up, and they're really, really in demand right now. So if that suffices, I'd like to highlight them. Akowe is their name, AKOWE.app. Awesome.
Okay, great. Could you name a few traits that project had that literally led them to being successful and to the place they're at today?
Okay. One is what I like to call the problem obsession. Okay, so Again, one of the perks of my job, quote unquote, is that I get to be like someone who gets into a helicopter and rises above a forest, right? So I'm not limited to the view of standing at ground level and looking at the front row of trees. I can see, high level. So where I'm going with that is, many times founders who are often very smart people fall for the trap of what I call, or what's called in the consulting world, solutioning, which is defining a solution and then defining a solution that is really, really smart and is very, very, for instance, buzzworthy, right? Blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning, AI, and then looking for a problem and or a set of customers to sell that solution to. So in contrast, I would like to highlight, as your question has highlighted, I'd like to highlight these particular founding teams, these particular founders focus on the problem as the first and most important element of the solution, rather than bringing a solution and looking for problems and customers to match it with, right? So one is that, so that's what I called earlier problem obsession.
Okay.
In my work with startup founders, I see this a lot. So many times I often have to coach them and gently tell them, you sound like you are really, really selling a solution. What if you framed it this way? Can you put yourself in the shoes of somebody who's in pain right now and try and describe to me why that person would find what you are talking about even relevant, why they would stop what they're doing and pay attention to what you're saying. So that's number one. There's a couple of other things, technical expertise, stuff like that. But
yeah, I can definitely see that. Creating a problem when there really isn't a problem could be an issue. I do wonder, what are some common pitfalls you've seen in startups, and how can they be avoided?
Okay, startups generally, and then I'll talk about Web3 startups. One is, and I think that the data is out there. I think the data is that 84% thereabout. I have one schematic that I had on my laptop a couple months ago. That tells us that 84% of startups will fail because they build something that users do not want, or rather, not that they build something that users do not want. They didn't build something that users want. So, because human beings are actually quite very, very simple creatures, right? It might take a long time to find what users want, but once you find it, it's like an endless tap. It's like an endless stream, right? Because now I always use this example. I always say that all human beings have a decision-making framework, a uniform decision-making framework in our minds, in our brains. Whether you are uneducated in a third world country, or you are at the top of the biggest global Fortune 500 company, right? Everybody has this decision-making framework, and it's a pain-related framework. We always consider alternative decisions according to pain. So, if the pain of living with a problem is greater than the pain of paying you for the solution to that problem, I will pay you. But if the pain of living with that problem is not a major pain, something I can bear and live with, I'm not going to pay you. And all of us are like this. This is the reason why we go to school. This is the reason why the pain of going to school is less than the pain of not going to school. The pain of getting married, for those that eventually get married, the pain of, going to parties, the pain of looking cool in society, fear of missing out, and so on and so forth. So that principle helps us understand that when we find something that when we find a problem in the life of our customer that is very painful, the beautiful thing about building startups is that high pain severity maps to high willingness to pay. And so, if you found a problem in the life of your customer, your potential customer, that is very painful, chances are high that you are going to build a high growth, high valuable startup, because customers will literally be asking you, can I pay? Can I pay? Because I want to get rid of my pain, right? And so that is the trait that, that's the number one pitfall that I'd like to highlight. Many founders fall into the trap of thinking that this problem was highlighted by the World Bank and Statista.org, and this is the major thing that farmers in Africa are going through. This is the major thing that people in Singapore are going through. If I solve this problem, I'm going to build $1 million startup. It may not work out that way until you understand actually what that customer is going through as a pain point, and you can place your solution side by side and simply articulate to that person, dear customer, if you continue the way you are going, either using the alternatives that you're using or continue bearing the pain, you are suffering more than if you pay me a tiny token to take away this problem from your life. They will rush to you. I hope I don't sound like a university lecturer.
That was great. That was great. To kind of expand a little bit further, what are some effective strategies for fundraising in Web3 startups? What's some of what do you think is some of the best and some of your favorite?
Okay, so fundraising, Web3. If you permit me, can I break those into two categories, right? Traditional and non-traditional. Traditional meaning not necessarily tied to Web3, not necessarily tied to blockchain, right? And in that category, we'll have things like traditional venture capital funding. So if whether you're building a Web3 or not, you can access venture capital funding, depending on if venture capital funding is the right type for you. I always say that VC funding is not the right type of funding for us, but some people are at a stage and in a locale where angel funding is the best option for them, right? Some people are at the stage, where bootstrapping is the best option at that particular time. So number one is traditional venture capital. Number two is grants and funding, right? From granting organizations, Number three is crowdfunding, okay? And number four is strategic partnerships and alliances. And, if you think about these four funding techniques or approaches that I mentioned, they are kind of not exclusive to blockchain or Web3. So that's why I call them traditional.
Yep.
On the non-traditional side, I have three options. One is the good old ICO, right, that everybody knows, a token offering or more technically called an initial coin offering, an ICO. Two is an initial DEX offering, an IDO. And three is sales of the new trend, non-fungible tokens, right? So again, like abstract art is as valuable as the viewer says it is. If I walk into an art gallery and I see abstract art, it may mean nothing to me, but the next person can walk in there and say, I will pay $1 million for that piece of art. Please deliver it to my doorstep tomorrow, right? So it's the same thing with non-fungible tokens, right? Mm-hmm. People can create digital assets and sell them as a fundraising strategy. So if I may, those are the traditional and non-traditional methods that I would recommend, that I would highlight.
You hit on some great points. Yeah, I do like that you can definitely utilize these traditional funding methods for not just traditional companies, but also for Web3. And you can also integrate Web3 funding, like you mentioned, with the ICOs and NFTs for access and stuff of that nature for fundraising as well. Can you maybe give us some takeaways for entrepreneurs looking to venture into the Web3 space?
Okay. At this point, if you don't mind, I'd like to give pointers that apply to all startups. Okay,
Of course. Go
So
for it.
I have, I've kind of developed, pardon my arrogance, for thinking that I can, but I've kind of developed a rubric, right? A three-leg rubric, right? For quickly filtering between pitches, and what startups I want to pay attention to and take to the next level and have coffee with, and have further discussions with. Three things. Number one, like I said earlier, I already described this. Can you describe for me that painful, annoying, severe, frustrating, agonizing problem that you have found? And if you are not able to deliver a solution to that problem, these people are just going to continue suffering, right? It's a big problem, but for some reason, they've been overlooked. So problem A, an evocative, hopefully emotionally evocative problem statement. Leg one of my three. Number two, have you arrived at an iteration of a solution that makes those customers go literally crazy about what you are offering them? So two keywords there. Number one is, have you arrived at an iteration? Meaning, don't come to the startup game thinking that building the solution on the solution you have on day one is the perfect solution. You need to come to it with a mindset that perhaps the solution that will finally vibe with your customer base may be 6 months down the line, but it's going to be a grueling, iterative feedback, back and forth, continuous cycle of feedback type of endeavor or effort through those 6 months until you arrive at that iteration that the customers are like, oh my God, Harley, oh my God, Sean, where have you guys been all my life? Can you take my money right now? And then you say, dear customer, we are not actually ready. Can you wait for us for 6 months to get the product ready? And the customer says, I don't mind waiting. Can you take my money? Take my money. That's you've sold a dream, you sold a promise. That iteration of the solution, if you can describe that to me, check number one, check number two. Now, the third leg, okay, is how big can this get? If you have, for instance, discovered an opportunity to invent a new type of hand sanitizer, please pardon my example, okay?
Mm-hmm.
And that's fine, that's a technical product, right? However, in the market wherein you play, either due to regulatory or other constraints, you are not able to sell more than 300 copies of this in a year, then you do not have a market and you're not going anywhere. So the third leg is the market. First leg is problem, solution, and the market potential. So have you validated that, yes, you found a painful problem, you've been able to build an iteration of a solution that people are passionate and really, really excited about, but how many people can you find at that excitement level? And number one, how many people can you find? Number two, does that market, that cluster of people, does it look like it's growing into the next few years, or will it be shrinking into the next few years? Mm-hmm. If it shrinks, it's most likely not going to be a good market for an investor to jump into. But if it's going to be a growing market, you definitely have check number three from me, and I'm having coffee with you in the shortest possible time. So,
yeah. Exactly, man. That was powerful. So we're going to go ahead and wrap it up. Is there anything else that you would like to tell the audience about you, your company, or even some more startup tips? Anything you got, go ahead and let us know.
I don't know. Well, right now, nothing particular comes to mind. I just like to harp on that problem thing again, right? A lot of startup founders are smart people. And every smart person, including myself, has a weakness to sometimes overplay the solution above the problem. And I regularly catch myself doing this all the time, right? So, so that's the last thing that I would say. Always remember to validate each of your assumptions against the person that is experiencing that problem. that's what I'd like to drop in.
Definitely 100%. Yeah. So can you tell the people how to find you, where to find you, and yeah,
Okay.
hopefully we could
Okay. So
future startups. Going.
Thank you so much. So I'm very active on LinkedIn. LinkedIn is where I can most easily be reached. I also maintain a presence on what's it called? Twitter, now X, Instagram, and Facebook. And on all of those, if you just search for my name, Idowu, Idowu Akinde, Akinde. In fact, if you join those two words together and type in any of those things, you'll see me. I'm easy to find. I like to talk about startups, venture capital, the potential that startups have to change the world. And
Yeah.
that. So I look forward to that. Thank you.
It's very interesting. This isn't just your job. This is your life. And, I love that about you. I think that you have been bringing tons of value to not only Africa, but you're going global now. And, there's a large opportunity in this industry and with these technologies, all over the world for it. So we're really excited having you. And yeah, we'll definitely looking forward to catching back up with you here in the future.
Thanks a lot, Sean. Thanks a lot, Harley.
Appreciate
Awesome.
you. Thank you.